In choosing Barnum as one of the 100 most important people of the millennium, Life magazine dubbed him the patron saint of promoters. So I'm introducing to you Phineas Taylor Barnum, the patron saint of promoters.
You've been waiting for Barnum? You've been waiting for Barnum?
Yeah!
Yes, there we go. Well, I'm Barnum. Phineas Taylor Barnum. All right, it'll sit. I don't have to do anything with it. Just needs to sit there. Poor thing. Poor thing. I've gotten a better table. Anyway. You know, I believe this is sort of the moral of my talk today. Anyone who expects something for nothing is sure to be cheated, and generally deserves to be, and I think you got this for nothing. I'm a great promoter. Well, I promote myself and my service, of course. When I go around the world, I just came back from all the crowned heads of Europe, and I must tell you, being in Europe, it is so much better to be back here in the land of democracy. I've been before the crowned heads of Europe, but as I always say, I prefer to be before the bald heads of America. I do enjoy being back here, but I have taken to promote myself. I've made it much more simple than the father promotion or what have you. Some have called me the father of advertising, the father of the circus, the prince of humbug. I like that. We'll talk about humbug. But I make it much more simple. I am the son of the amusement world, from which all lesser luminaries borrow light. Think me too egotistical? Perhaps. But no one has had a career so crowded with incident, enterprise, and various intercourse with the world than I. And my biography, which is the largest selling book in our nation's history, my biography, my autobiography, which I brought with me, details all these things. I believe my autobiography is a chronicler of the struggles and triumphs that I have had in my life, which are the struggles and triumphs of any great man of American society. Now, yes, none as great as I. Not since George Washington. It's been a downhill run for America until I came along. But, now, I must say, before I go further, before some of you came here expecting simply a string of jokes and nonsense, conveying no moral purpose, you should understand that the more refined and intelligent an audience is, the greater satisfaction I give. And looking at this august body before me, I know you will deeply be satisfied. But I did not take credit for my career, not completely. It was God who put me on this earth to follow the path that I have done. I am a simple man. I believe that God never sends accident, disease, or other so-called evil except for some ultimate good purpose. You can tell I'm a universalist, not a congregationalist. Congregationalists, a starless, rayless abyss of a religion. Because they see no light in the world. They do not believe that God came here to make everything better. Why else was I given the lessons of my youth? If I was not to be on the path that I am on and become the son of the amusement world, why was I born in the community of Bethel, Connecticut? A very small town, Bethel, Connecticut. And there I learned the lessons which have shaped my life. In Bethel, of course, my father was a small farmer, but I was really shaped in everything by my maternal grandfather, for whom I was named Phineas Taylor. Now, Phineas Taylor owned a shop, a store. And I realized very early on that I preferred to be at his store than on my father's farm. I have never been one who likes to work with his hands. I believe head work is much more conducive to things than back and arm work. I never like to work hard. People misunderstand me. But I didn't like to work hard in the fields. So I spent more and more time in the store, and there I learned the lessons from my grandfather. I learned that we took many things in on barter, and it was almost assumed that whoever tried to barter with us would try to cheat us. My grandfather had the saying that you can believe your eyes barely, but not your ears at all. You can believe little that you heard, or little that you saw, and even less that you heard. It was assumed by my grandfather that if we took in a clock, say a clock, that was no better suited for the purpose of telling time than a chest of drawers. Now, this sounds terrible, but my grandfather also taught me that Americans are the hardest working people on earth, but they need something for their gayer moods. And I learned from my grandfather that a man who was in the business of amusing the American people was in a business ordained by God, by the maker of our souls. And I learned this while dealing with what we called it, you might call that cheating. We called it coming it over each other. But what I learned was Americans would pay to be amused, even if they were conscious of being deceived. That Americans liked to be deceived. I believe, think of this, that you can outright cheat a man out of $1. And if you do it skillfully enough and amuse him along the way, he will pay you another $1 to explain how you did it to him. Better still, if you do that well enough, he'll pay you yet another $1, or perhaps more, to tell him or his friends how you did it to him. Americans were disposed to be amused, and would go to any lengths and almost pay any price. This was the lesson I learned in my grandfather's shop as we came it over. Now, I'm not going to tell all the stories in Bethel. They're all here in my autobiography. Did I mention it was for sale for a small fee after we meet? I think it has everything in there on Bethel and my childhood. But by the time I was 16 or 17, I wished not to be there. My father had passed away, and I wished to explore the broader world. And I'd heard stories of New York City and the opportunities in New York City for a man such as myself. A man who had learned at the master's lab, my grandfather. And so I went off to New York City to make my fortune. Never got there. Along the way, I fell in with a man who was having a traveling circus, and I joined him as his assistant. He liked the cut of my jib, he said. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I went with him. And in the circus, I learned many, many things. I learned how to handle money, but I started to learn that what my grandfather had started me on the road was on the road of humbug. And I learned more of humbug in this circus as we traveled all over the South. I was a magician's assistant. I was a blackface minstrel singer. I was, and will always claim, the world's worst blackface minstrel singer. I am arguably the worst white-face singer that has ever been heard. But I learned many lessons from him. I learned one lesson about advertising long before I had thought about it. We were in this small community, and the owner of the circus liked to imbibe, and so he was in the saloon one afternoon, and we were showing that evening, and we had been afraid that the audience would not be large. So I'm walking down the street, unbeknownst to me, he starts talking to the people, and I had made many trips across the street in front of the saloon to get things for the evening's performance. And he had seen me, and he finally came up with this plan. He told the people in the saloon, and said, well, I can't believe this community. I thought this was a good, God-fearing community. And look at you. And they said, what do you mean? Look at you. I thought you believed in God and the great things. And there are communities where that man out there would never be allowed to walk through. And they all looked just as I walked by. And he pointed at me as I walked by. He said, that man there has been run out of most good, God-fearing communities because of his lapse of morals. They all became aroused. They asked what I had done, and he said it was too evil to even communicate. But that man deserved not to be in any community, but should be in hell. Well, he riled them up enough. They ran out of the saloon, bodily grabbed me, dragged me down the street, put me on a horse, tied a rope around my neck to hang me, and then my boss arrived to explain, oh, I'm sorry. That's not the man I thought. That's my assistant, T Barnum. And we all laughed about the joke. I was considerably vexed by this joke. However, attendance was large that night because he had to advertise the circus. Without paying a single penny, he advertised the circus. A lesson not lost on me. Well, I won't spend much more time on my circus days in the South, but things changed rapidly then. I met a man, as I was leaving the circus, who was displaying a woman. Joyce Heth was her name. She was a negress, very, very old, and she claimed to be George Washington's nurse. Now, if you add up the years, this is in the 1830s, it would have made her roughly 150 years old. Now, she told wonderful stories of little Georgie when he was a boy, the cherry tree and everything else. I was fascinated by how much people wanted to talk to her. So I purchased her contract from this man. And we toured around and made a great deal of money because people wanted to hear the lessons for her. Now some of you will say, well, Mr. Barnum, as many said to me, she could not possibly be 150 years old. Didn't matter to me. I didn't question it. She said she was. I believed it. She told wonderful stories. I must tell you, there's another lesson of humbug. We were in one community, and attendance had fallen off. People had come and seen her, and she had told her stories. So there came a notice in the newspaper, the local newspaper, that in fact, Joyce Heth, now appearing with Mr. Barnum, is not 150 years old. In fact, Joyce Heth, now appearing with Mr. Barnum, is actually a phone automaton operated by a midget who sits under her chair and under her skirt. I have no idea where this story came from. But soon they were all crowded back, and they would talk to her. And as they spoke to her, you could see them sort of turn and looking for his feet. Well, Joyce passed away, but along the way I met another man who was distributing or presenting a creature that he was making no money with, and I purchased the contract. I purchased the item for $40. It's not a real creature. It was, in fact, dead, and we never made any pretense that it wasn't. It was, though, part monkey and part fish. It was, of course, the Fiji mermaid. Now, he had made more money out of it because this fellow knew nothing of humbug. He knew no way to bring people in to see it. course, did. When I purchased it, he said he was averaging $2 a week. Within the first week, I was averaging $50 a week, at a time when $1 a week would be good pay. I did well with the Fiji Mermaid. Well, that sort of led my way upstate. I was headed back to Connecticut for a bit, and I heard about another attraction that seemed interesting to me. Someone told me of a young man who was an incredible character and only this tall. Of course, as many of you know, his name was Stratton, but we called him Tom Thumb. Colonel Tom Thumb became a great friend of mine. With many years we worked together, but we made a great deal of money. Unfortunately, Tom, later in his life, became enamored with liquid refreshment and killed himself at a rather young age, sadly enough. But he became my next great attraction. And we came into New York City to find our fame and fortune with the Fiji Mermaid, a juggler, and some other things, and Tom Thumb. Then along the way, I tried other things of humbug. I came up with an idea. I found as I talked to people, people were very interested in the West. Very interested in the wild areas out past the Mississippi. And so I decided that what we should have is some attraction. And I came up with the idea of a buffalo hunt in Hoboken. Right across from New York City. And people came over in boats to Hoboken to see a buffalo hunt. Now, I should tell you, it was a free buffalo hunt. They came off the boats. Here were chairs, sat out on benches, really. They sat down in this giant penned area behind them. After a bit, out from the bushes came this buffalo. A real live western buffalo. Several thousand years old, probably. It could barely move. Fur was falling off. You get the idea. Sort of staggers out. Out of the other side comes a cowboy with a rope. Walks up to the buffalo, puts the rope around its horns, leads the buffalo off. Did you see a buffalo hunt? Yes, you did. We never said what kind of buffalo hunt, did we? Humbug. Now, you would think people would be upset by that. No, the American people were amused by it. It was reported in the New York Times that when the first boat was going back to New York, and the first boat was going back to New York, and the second boat was coming out to Hoboken, the first boat yelled, the second boat yelled over, well, so, how was the buffalo hunt? And they yelled back, it was a complete humbug, but hurrah for whoever did it to us. How did I make the money? You had to pay to get on the boat. The buffalo hunt was free, transportation cost you a nickel. I owned the boat, I made money. Well, do remember, anyone who expects something for nothing is sure to be cheated and deserves to be. Anyway, of course, in 1840, I had Tom, and I had the Fiji Mermaid, and I had some other items, and I went, what I really need to do is create a museum. And so I opened, as a brash young man, I went off to the bank and secured a loan and opened Barnum's Great Museum, which for the next, what was it, 30 years, would be the center of entertainment and amusement in New York City. The museum was filled with all sorts of oddities. Of course, Tom was there, and the Fiji Mermaid, and soon we had Zip. And now some people call Zip the Pinhead. It's not actually what I called him, what is it? Is he man? Is he monkey? Is he both? Actually, I didn't name him what is it. Charles Dickens showed up. And I was touring around my museum, and he saw Zip, and he went, what is it? Wonderful name. Perfect humbug. Put it out there. I had all sorts of attractions. By time, in 5 floors, it had over 250,000 wonders of man's science and God's nature. We had animals from all over the world. We built a giant tank and brought whales into there, along with fish from the tropical seas that no one had ever seen before. We had camel leopards. Camel leopards, they're tall and have a long neck. You call them giraffes. Well, people had heard of giraffes. No one had heard of a camel leopard. Humbug. We brought in that Colonel Fremont brought back from the Colorado Territory. Colonel Fremont brought back, and we displayed it, the woolly horse. It was part buffalo, part camel, part deer, part elephant, and part horse. It was this tall, covered with fur, that jumped 16 feet straight up in the air. No one ever saw him jump 16 feet straight up in the air, but he looked like he could. We had all sorts of attractions, human, animal, science. We had a giant display for many people in New York City had heard about the wonder of Niagara Falls, but had never been there. And so we had a man build an exact replica in a room this size of Niagara Falls, pumping water over it. That alone was worth a nickel to be admitted into the Barnum's Museum. Oh, we had everything. In there, too, as well, we had a theater. Now, I thought that we should legitimize theater. You know, I've been called the Reverend Phineas Taylor Barnum, not just because every Sunday I go to church. Wherever I am, I find a church and go to it, sometimes even a Congregationalist church, but I prefer never. But I go to church, and if I believe the minister is making a hash of it, I'll get up myself and speak the sermon. But I'm also called that because I unflinchingly excise anything I found would not be tasteful to Americans from theater, such as some of the works of Mr. Shakespeare. There are places in there that are a bit offensive, and so we cut them out. At our theater as well, most theaters at the time, the upper, they called it the 3rd tier, was filled with ladies of the evening and alcohol sales. And even our proper gentlemen went up there during the show. Well, we banned all that because I wanted women and children to come into my theater. They would go to no other theater but Barnum's. We unflinchingly got rid of, there was no opera within my theater, I must say. We brought in Jenny Lind to show proper singing, but not opera. Opera is just a bunch of ill-mannered screeching. And never, mind you good ladies, never anything like ballet. As my wife said, these women should be horsewhipped and then confined on bread and water until they take up a more suitable endeavor. I mean, dancing around half naked as they do. Not in my museum, and not in my theater. And I will say one more thing. There's this fellow, Buffalo Bill, walking around saying that he created the Wild West show. He probably saw it first in my theater, long before that charlatan ever created it. But my theater was filled with wonders, but I could go on and on and on. Did I mention all the stories of my theater at my museum are right here in this autobiography? Did I mention it was for sale? For a small sum. Great. Oh, good. I wanted to make sure I hadn't overlooked that. But yes, but the museum was wonderful, except it burned down. Not just once, but twice. Well, the first time a Confederate sympathizer, Copperhead, burned it down because of my sympathies for the Union. But the second time was an act of nature, probably, or a watchman smoking again. Anyway, when it burned down, my good friend Horace Greeley said to me, he said, "Barnum, it's been 27 years. You've done enough. You've done enough." I didn't know what he meant by that. But I thought it was time to go a-fishing. And I must say my wife, Charity, wanted me home. She had been telling me for years and years and years to come home, that I was never at home. She wanted me back. Well, I was home for a short while, and you gentlemen may be able to understand this. After a very brief time, Charity was saying, "Why don't you go away for a while?" Well, I was sort of bouncing off the walls. I had nothing to do. I didn't fit retirement. I mean, I was only 50 or 60 at the time, and I couldn't retire. I wanted something grand. I wanted something bigger than a museum. Something bold and gigantic. Something worthy of its originator and worthy of the country that gave it birth. Two men came to my door. As I say, God makes no accident, disease, except for some ultimate good purpose. They came to my door. I had no idea who they were. They knocked and they said, "Mr. Barnum, we would like to use your name for a circus." Perfect. I agreed. They thought they were getting just my name. They got Phineas Taylor Barnum, the son of the amusement world. Soon they were no more. But the circus in Barnum was alive. And it became bigger and bigger. And of course you know, and I'll tell you the story perhaps later, along the way, after about 4 years, I met a young man named James A. Bailey. And we combined our circuses together, Barnum and Bailey. And we were a great circus. We were the biggest amusement in America. Our tent was 600 feet long. Our entire area when the circus came to town needed 10 acres to display the circus tent, the sideshow tent, the freak show tent, the menagerie tent, and all the accoutrements for over 2,000 human performers, over 700 animals. We had everything in this circus. A gigantic place. The tent itself was 70 feet high. We had everything. We had freaks. Now, by then, Tom Thumb had passed away. But Chang and Eng were with me, the Siamese twins, as well as bearded ladies and fat men and fat women and all sorts of things. We even, of course, had some other little people with me. One of my great attractions then was Zip was still with me. Zip had now gone from crawling across the stage to actually sitting there reading the New York Times, which made people incomprehensible that Zip could read. Anyway, but we had all sorts of freaks, all sorts of animals. We had the blood-sweating beast of the Holy Writ. You know, they live in water. And if you roll them around in red clay, which they love to wallow in, and they go in water, it looks like blood. Hippopotamus would be the term, along with American unicorn. It has a single horn, actually comes from Africa. A rhinoceros, of course. But rhinoceros is not good humbug. People have heard of that. And of course, along the way, we had Jumbo the elephant, the greatest wonder of the world, the largest elephant ever. We only had him for 2 years, though, unfortunately. Of course, the third year, we had him for 2 more years after that. Well, but then it wasn't just one. We had 2 Jumbos. As you know, he was killed the second year. And so we had his skin mounted here, taxidermed, and his skeleton over here. The 2 Jumbo show. Bigger than a single Jumbo show. Get the idea of humbug here. But we had many, many features. And we had human performance. Human performance you could not believe. We had Giselle. Giselle was not just the first human being shot out of a cannon. She was the first woman as well. Giselle, and you've been to the Ringling Brothers, right? The Ringling Brothers with their filthy dog and pony show. It's nothing compared to the Barnum and Bailey. But anyway, they had a cannon act, but not like Giselle. Right? You've seen cannon acts. They fire and they land in a net. Oh, who can't do that? There's no skill or danger in that. Suzelle was fired out of a cannon, and on her way across the arena, her husband was hanging from a trapeze, and he would snatch her out of the air as she went by. We have Madame Latour, now with us. She loops an automobile, 2 loops, rides it down a ramp, and it does 2 somersaults in the air and rides down the other side. An amazing woman, but my favorite, of course, was Desperado. Desperado, dressed only in his, you remember him, only in his union suit underwear, would climb to the top of the arena and dive. Oh yes, I know what you're thinking. You've seen the Ringling Brothers dive into what? A little thing of water. Who can't do that? Desperado dove down and landed on a polished wooden plank, a children's slide put down backwards. He would land on his chest, slide down, fly off, and land in sawdust on a pile on the other side. He would get up and motion to the people's style, as we call it, and of course you would always see the holes burned in from the energy of sliding down the wood. Did I mention that Desperado is no longer with us? Well, I have many more stories about circuses I could tell, but I wanted to make sure you knew you could find them in my autobiography. Did I mention it was for sale, perhaps? Did I? I hope so. You know, the circus became so wonderful, I called it simply the greatest show on earth. And it was. One man said, Barnum's circus brings us 1,000 new conceptions of the world. And it was true. Most people saw their first automobile at the head of my parade at the start of Ringling Brothers in 1894. Barnum and Bailey, no, Ringling Brothers. They didn't even know what an automobile was. The first bicycle was seen by most people on my stage being performed in the act before they ever saw it on the streets. Automobile, as I said, the wonders of Mr. Edison's moving pictures were in my sideshow, and the wonder of them all, the electric light, illuminated my sideshow before any home besides Mr. Edison's. This was what I mean by 1,000 new conceptions of the world. Mr. Graham Bell's telephone was in my sideshow. People could come and see it, pick it up, and communicate to people hundreds of feet away across the tent. Amazing. People were stupefied. I became the son of the amusement world because of this. Now, you think this is just bravado. Well, don't believe me. Purchase my autobiography. It's all there. But beyond that, take the word of our late President, General Grant. He went around the world after he finished office. The most famous American when he returned, and we had become friends. And I said to him, well, President Grant, how does it feel to be the most famous American in the whole world? He said, but Barnum, you have it all wrong. Everywhere that I went, they would only ask what they had heard as a rumor. Do you know Barnum? And when I said we were friends, they shook my hand just to touch the man who had touched P.T. Barnum's hand. He said I shook hands 1,000 times by proxy for you. You know, this book comes to me. Tells much more. I shouldn't spend time, but it lists in here as well my philanthropic endeavors. People don't remember that I've been in politics, lamentably in politics. I was mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut, my home now, for 1 term. Well, they thought they were getting P.T. Barnum of circuses. I am P.T. Barnum the gentleman, the Reverend P.T. Barnum. And so, when they passed blue laws, which I insisted on, we made the good gentleman stop drinking on Sundays. In fact, I closed all the saloons in Bridgeport every day. I closed all the houses of ill repute in Bridgeport. And I went so far, as I hope this community does not do it, but to stop what I think is the most nefarious activity Americans ever taken up, the playing of baseball. Nothing is learned from it, nothing amusing or edifying about it, or just hitting a sphere with the stick. I opened low-cost housing for the workers, a hospital, all sorts of philanthropic endeavors. The first water system in Bridgeport came from me. I also, as this will chronicle, I spent time 2 years in the Connecticut legislature. I was the first man in Connecticut to stand up in the legislature and proclaim that the rights of women for equality under the law. Now, gentlemen, don't think me that wrong. We've been a little purblind in excluding women from having a voice in the laws that govern them. But women should not vote. I agree with you. Voting day is such a rowdy, raucous, drunken thing that men take part in. Bringing women out into that will only pollute the women. The good things about women would be destroyed by bringing them out into voting day. But I also stood up very proudly. And this was a very big moment for I, because I stood up and called for the enfranchisement of the Negro shortly after the war had ended. Now, as many of you know, and if you've read my autobiography, you will know in there, when I toured the South with the circus, I had a black assistant. And yes, if you ask, he was a slave. And yes, I had him beaten for stealing. But I should have been beaten 1,000 times for having done so. But back then I was of the Democratic persuasion. And Democrats, they are nothing but slaveholders. But I digress. I'm a proud Republican, a Lincoln Republican. But I stood up for the enfranchisement, and many said to me, "How, Mr. Barnum, can you say that? Even if you believe that slavery is wrong, as we all do, how can they vote? Because they are not equal to us. How can we give them the same rights as us? They are not our equal." And I looked at them and I said, "Gentlemen, I am Phineas Taylor Barnum. No one is my equal. You do not see me trying to take your vote away." So they have less intelligence than we do. That may be, or it may be a factor of the scourge of slavery they've been in for hundreds of years. But beyond that, the immortal soul that God created and Christ died for is not to be trifled with by man. And whether that soul inhabits a Negro, a Chinaman, an Arab, or whatever, it is still an immortal soul. And that is all that is important. And yes, they may not be as good as you or you. Clearly, you're not as good as me. And that is my basic point. Well, but I was terrible at politics, as you can tell. You know, to be honest, you cannot be a success in politics if you have any ethics whatsoever. And beyond that, think of what you have to do as a politician. You have to shake hands with people you despise, and you have to kiss their ugly babies. Well, it is all here in this book. You know, another thing in this book I wanted to mention. I talked about humbug. And humbug became what people have called me the father of advertising. Humbug is not to cheat somebody with a clearly inferior product. It is not to swindle them. It is to come it over, to match your wits, and to entice them to come. As I said, it is to send up flaming skyrockets and banners to promote it, to make people think and talk only about what you are trying to sell or produce. That's why I've always said, I don't mind that people call me a charlatan, a cheat. I don't mind. It's not true. The only thing I mind is when they say it in the papers, spell it correctly, and put down the address. But I do not care. Just mention my name, because I'll give you some quick advertising story. Printer's ink is the one liquid a man can consume that won't consume him. Printer's ink is the first, second, and third ingredient in business success. Advertising. I've always believed in it. Here's a simple, if I can remember this, I always do this wrong. There's a 10-step, maybe it's a 7-step process. We're about to find how many steps it is. It's all in this book, but I seem to forget it. But a process for advertising. The first time you promote something, a gentleman will see it, he won't even recognize it, just passes through. The second time he sees it, he recognizes it, he understands that he saw it, and that's as far as it goes. The third time he understands it, sees it, pulls it into his head, and starts to think of a plan. Maybe he will go, maybe he will purchase that product. The fifth time, he now sees it, and now he has decided he will go. The sixth time, he invites all his friends to go with him or to help purchase the product. The seventh time, he asks his wife for permission to go. It is 7 after all. As I was doing that, I was going, I wonder what the other 3 are. Maybe I should check it. But advertising is so simple. To create the speaking and talking about your product, your good. I once had what we called the brick man for several years in front of my museum. I would send him out in the middle of the day in New York City, and I'd give him 5 bricks. And I'd say, go out to the first corner, take a brick, put it down, cross the street, go to the other corner, put the brick down, go to the third corner, put this brick there, go to the fourth corner on the intersection, put the 4th brick down. Take the 5th brick, walk to the first, exchange it. Go to the second, exchange it. Keep going around. Speak to no one. Eventually, a crowd will form of New Yorkers going, what's he doing? What is he doing? Then, when a suitable sized crowd is formed, pick up the bricks one by one, stack them, and go into the door of my museum. At least half the crowd would follow to pay the nigger to find out what he was doing. This is humbug. The basics of arresting attention. And then when they came in, they saw 250,000 wonders, and they were more than happy to have spent their nickel. And I tried everything in advertising. I could talk many more, but I won't. I shan't do it. They're all inside this book. Well, I did want to say what made me successful. People ask, Mr. Barnum, what is your secret to success besides advertising? And I said, well, advertising is built on the lessons I had as a child. And I'm going to give you the 3 fundamental facts of Americans that maybe you've learned from this already. The first is the sense of equality of Americans. We have a fierce sense of equality. A first fierce sense of individualism is part of that equality. Right? I told you about the clocks in my grandfather's store. Now, some Europeans have seen it, Dickens and others, and they said, and Mr. de Tocqueville, remember that Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville? He said the Americans have this, he saw that and saw the coming it over, and he said Americans have this rapacious, I believe that's the word, rapacious desire for money. Right? Think about it. You go in and purchase meat from the butcher. Does he put his thumb on the scale? Huh? Very American. How's that about the pennies he makes from that? It's coming it over. In our country, Your rate, your status in a society is not based on who you were born, where you came from. It's made on a meritocracy, a perfect equality. It's on your ability, your brains, your guile, coming it over. Can you get away with it? Equality. We are constantly fighting with each other, vesting in little ways. I give you another way to think about this. Think of a joke, especially between friends. Your friend tells you a joke, or your wife, your husband. What are you doing halfway through their joke? You're thinking of a funnier joke to tell them, to top them, right? What do we gain from that? Status, meritocracy. This is, in fact, the beauty of it, and Americans love it. You all love magicians. Does a magician make anything disappear like this chair? Of course not. You know that going in, but you test your mind against his skill to see if he can do that. You're amused by it. You're edified by his skill, and you're trying to figure out how he did it. You're competing. It's a meritocracy, equality, individualism. You know, it goes to mind that this also is part of our practical jokes. And our jokes alone. Now, let me say this. This is what de Tocqueville was upset about. Because Europeans do not have a sense of humor. Because they are raised in a society that status is set when you're born. There is no equality. There is no individualism to raise you up. You are where you are born. You tell a joke to a European, well, the only ones who laugh are the Irish, and that's because they drink a lot. but my second wife, Nancy, is English. My first wife passed away, and Nancy is English. And I told her my favorite joke. I will tell you now my favorite joke. The world's ugliest man is walking through the woods. Hounded out of every community he's ever been in. I mean, he is incredibly ugly. Think of the ugliest person you've ever seen. Make it 10 times worse. You aren't even close to this man. He's so ugly. And he's walking along, and he walks into a clearing, and on the other side of the clearing is this stranger out hunting. And the stranger looks at this man, points his gun right at him and says, "Prepare to die, sir." The ugly man stands back and says, But why? Why? This man with the gun points at him and says, "I always said that if I met a man as ugly as I am, I'd shoot him and put him out of his misery." The ugly man standing there thinking, "I'm as ugly as you are? Go ahead and shoot." All Nancy said was, "Oh, the poor man." I really don't understand our practical jokes. Practical jokes is American art form because you must show your ability to take a practical joke, not just play it. Practical jokes come in every way. That's a joke. It seemed very funny at the time. We were crossing the Atlantic Ocean to England on a boat, of course, and 3 friends and my wife, Charity. She did not like to be on ships. Halfway across on the darkest night, we decided we would have a joke at her expense and have a purser break into the cabin and claim that the ship was sinking. She ran on deck, half clothed, couldn't find any of us, arrived there, half clothed, to all of us having a great deal of humor at her state. She was considerably vexed. We thought it was funny. Not talking to her for the next month was probably not that funny. But they could come in all sizes. I once, on a sideshow banner, because we had so many new attractions, I had a banner made up, "Come and see Barnum's new attraction, a man eating chicken." And so I had this giant chicken on the banner with huge teeth, blood dripping down as it ate a man. Part of him was on the ground and he was chewing on an arm or something. People came in, they paid a nickel to see this man eating chicken. They came in and saw a man eating chicken. Compete with me, huh? Did I lie to you? Oh, humbug. Perfectly American, because we want to test ourselves. I must tell you though, the greatest practical joke of all time was played on me. When I was 6, I think 6, my grandfather, Phineas Taylor, and as I said, he was everything to me. He came to me and said, "Young Phineas, I like you the best. So I'm going to give you my greatest possession, Ivy Island, the most beautiful island in the world. And it will secure your future for all time." For the next 7 years, when I saw my grandfather, he would always say, "Now, young Phineas, remember Ivy Island? It's wonderful." Boy, it's built. And other people started to say that my father said to me, "Young Phineas, now that you have Ivy Island, and you will take care of your mother and I in our old age, I know, as a young gentleman would." My mother even said to me, "Young Phineas, now that you're so wealthy with Ivy Island, you must remember still to play with the other children. Still be a good boy." Well, this went on all the time, and neighbors would say, "Will you still play with our children now that you're rich, young Phineas?" Everyone knew it. When I was 13 or 14, I could not wait any longer. I had to go see Ivy Island. So I convinced my parents that I could go, and I convinced my grandfather, and he hired a guide to take me to Ivy Island, about 30 miles away. We were gone for 2 or 3 days. I followed him, and we went through brambles and forests. I won't tell the whole story. There were snakes in the forest. One of the things we do not have in the circus is snakes. I do not like snakes. Got there, my clothing was torn. We came into this clearing. And he stopped and said, "Well, young Barnum, here it is, Ivy Island." And I looked around at the most God-forsaken swamp. I was crushed. My grandfather had played this on me. I came back into town just destroyed that my grandfather had done this to me. Then it started. The first door opened in the home. "Hey, young Phineas, how's Ivy Island?" The entire town was in on the practical joke. For 6 years, my grandfather, who would work harder, wait longer, contrive deeper than any human being to play a practical joke, had done it to me. But worse, it only came to me when I got home that my father and sainted mother were in on the practical joke to humiliate their only child. Ivy Island. You know, brings me to the second point. There are points here. Second point about America is on energy and enterprise. That's the other point I've always relied on. People have said to me, and this is from the English London Times, they said, Barnum is a representative American. He represents their energy and enterprise just as George Washington represented their resistance to tyranny. Tyranny. I was flattered by the comparison. Well, I've always lived by the creed that it is better to wear out than rust out. That we must put a little electricity in our blood. But I hate those people who vegetate through their existence, who look at me as some restless and reckless man. You know, I had one of those fellows at my home recently. Nancy and I are building a new home. And this fellow came in, and he's supposed to put in trees around it, landscape it, I think is the term. And he came in and said, "Mr. Barnum, what types of seedlings would you have like planted around the house?" And I said, "Seedlings, sir, seedlings. I have no time to plant watch trees grow, plant them full size." And so off he went. Watch trees grow. You need electricity. You need that energy now. That makes us restless. It does. Americans are famous for moving to the next community. We no sooner start a business than we leave before it makes much money because we think we'll make more over the hill. The grass is greener, right? We no sooner build a house than move before the roof is on. Europeans de Tocqueville saw this and said we are restless and reckless. But no, we have this burning energy to go forward. We are always trying to strive. You know, I have always pitied the simpleton who believes in luck for success. If you wait to reach the prize, some other confident hand will reach out and take it before you. I always planned and builded for my success. Now, I will admit, sometimes I have been amazed by the results. But it was pluck. It was drive. It was not luck. And this is an American trait. We are driven to succeed. Now the third trait is the simplest. We Americans are self-reliant. Because of the equality, because of individualism, we believe in ourselves above all others. We have faith in ourselves. I stand to you now, a man of some wealth. When my father died, I borrowed shoes to go to the funeral. We were that poor. I have believed in myself and made my career. When I brought Jenny Lynn to America, I had to pay her $200,000 ahead of time to pay for an entire year for her and an orchestra and all these people involved with it to travel around America. She wanted the money up front because she had heard that Barnum was about humbug, that Barnum would cheat you. Of course, I never did. I paid her all the money. Where did I get it? I mortgaged everything I owned and took out a loan. What happened? Because I believed in myself. Within 6 months, I made it back plus 100,000 more. By the way, she broke the contract after 6 months, went out on her own because she said, no one, I don't need Barnum. Her people had told her that. Within 2 weeks, she was back in Europe because she had gone broke. It was Barnum who made Jenny Lynn. But I believed in myself. Joyce Heth, the same way. People asked me about that and said, you know, what do you know about Joyce Heth? And I said, well, nothing. And the same with Jenny Lind. I didn't know. People said, Barnum, what do you know about music? I said, all I know is the sound of coins in my pocket. That was all I needed to know. You must have belief in yourself. And so, one more. When I purchased my museum, I walked into the banker. I said, I wish to purchase this building. I'm going to make a museum, and I need a lot of money. Please, give it to me. And he said, but young man, who are you? I am Phineas Taylor Barnum. He had no idea what that meant, because I was just starting out. I was a young man, and he didn't believe in me. But I believed in myself. I said to him again, no, sir, believe in me. We will become wealthy together. I will pay it back in no time, with interest. What do you have, young man? I cannot do that. I do not believe in you. Good day, sir. I started to leave. I said, but there must be something I can do. No, nothing, young man. Oh, he's a banker. Bankers only want money, right? Any bankers here? They never admit it after I say that. One step up from politician. And it's a small step. Anyway. So he went back to his books. I said, but sir, I said, good day, sir. I saw him to leave. But I must, he says, there is nothing unless you have collateral. But I have nothing, sir, I have nothing. I traveled, I have nothing. I don't even own a home. And he didn't respond. I saw the door. No, I don't have anything. Well, he heard me. He looked up. What do you mean, well, boy? No, I couldn't. Now he was interested. believe me, he jumped up. Now, banker, salivating. He thought there was money in it for him. What do you have, boy? What do you have? Well, I have this island. I told him the story of Ivan Island, looking at the shakes and storm. He advanced me the money right there with Ivy Island's collateral, which goes to show you a good practical joke should never be left alone. This was 20 years later, and my grandfather was right. Ivy Island, that practical joke, secured my future. But I believed in myself. And it is key to all my displays. It is a key to what we talked about with magicians. When I did Joyce, I'll just make it simple enough. The art of humbug. When we did the Fiji Mermaid, I put up a giant banner at the entrance when I came to New York City. And on it was a testimonial from an expert from the New York papers that said, a college professor, that said the Fiji Mermaid could not possibly have ever been real. And his name was there, gigantic. On the other side of the entrance, another giant banner with a testimonial from an expert who said the Fiji Mermaid was real. I wrote that one. Didn't put my name on it. But humbug. But the key was over the door. A sign that said, "Who is to decide when experts disagree?" You come in and you pay your nickel and you decide for yourself. We Americans don't need an expert or a European to tell us what to think, what to feel. We think for ourselves. We are totally independent and self-reliant. In fact, I made it even more democratic. As they left, as they went out, I said, "Please vote, whether you think it's real or not." And there are a box on each side to vote. Yes, it's real, you put a nickel in this one. And yes, it's not real, you put a nickel in that one. And I counted those votes every night. I could go on, but I shouldn't. I'd rather take some questions. And before we go into questions, I wanted to say, I know there's some talk about Bridgeport of building a statue to me. I'm very self-conscious about that. I hope the people of Bridgeport have the good sense to keep that statue in some warehouse until I'm moldering in the grave, and then bury it with me. Because I'm not half so cute, nor cunning, nor deep, nor evil as most persons believe. I'm just an American who has done his best to edify and amuse the American people. Sometimes I put my worst side outside, but always in the effort to amuse the American people, to follow the path that God put me on. And I want to say one other thing about our final days. If all of us can think back on our final days and look and say, you know, no matter our faults, we left the world a little better and a little happier place. And this is a great thing. And I think I've achieved that. And so I hope future generations treat me kindly. And for you all who've been here today and listened to me rant for so long, I want you to remember this. For the sake of your children, for the sake perhaps of your grandchildren, for the sake of yourselves, for the sake of our great nation. On the way out, purchase my old Totally deserved, but very kind. I'd like to take some questions you might have. On almost anything. No one. You know, if you won't ask questions, I will, of course, keep talking. But I wanted to say, and this was brought up earlier, someone said of me, that I said there's a sucker born every minute. I hope you understand after this that I never believed in that. Now, I did create the word suck. I used to say these things that were charlatans, where they did not give you your money's worth, that they did not edify or amuse you. It wasn't a Fiji mermaid or the wonders of tropical fish that people had never seen, or one of the million other things that I've done, or desperado. That if that was a cheat, I called it a suck. A friend and I used to call it a great big suck, because it sucked all the money and all the spirit out of humanity. But I never said that. I believe simply, and I'll make it clear, that any business people in here, I shan't insult you. Business people, you all know, any businessman who treats his customers rudely, pretending that he won't see them again, will not be disappointed. I always gave more than double my money's worth. I will tell you the story. Two things. First, I want to complete that phrase. My friend Horace Greeley found out who actually said that line, there's a sucker born every minute. His name was Paper Collar Joe. He was a short change artist in New York City, a grifter. And he came in, and his line, though, was, and it's an even better line, a sucker is born every minute, and fortunately, none of them die. And I never believed in that. I believed you had to give more than your money's worth. And I'm going to prove to this. My museum, within 6 years, we had more people come to the museum than totaled in the entire United States. They talked about it in Europe. When I'd get off a boat, they would say, Barnum? You mean a Barnum's museum? They hadn't even heard of it in New York, in England. This is the story of edifying and amusing. And I must say, it became so popular. I must tell you this. I created one of my greatest attractions because my museum was so popular. Now, back up. In the early days, it wasn't so popular. I had to arrest and arouse public attention. I put a band up on my balcony, and they played. A friend of mine said, but Barnum, I know the flags and the skylights you put up and all this to attract attention, but Barnum, and I know you know nothing about music, but do you understand that those people cannot play at all? I said, yes. But why, Barnum? I said, did you notice when they played? Whenever there was a large crowd in the street, the band would strike up and play with as much gusto as they could, and no talent whatsoever. And people would flee, paying the nickel to go in the museum to get away from them. But my point, and there was a point in this story that's going on for 10 minutes now. See, I told you need to ask questions. I came out one day. My museum was so filled with people. I came out one day, and here was an Irish family having lunch in front of my door. Well, I didn't mind that so much, except they had an open fire to cook it in a wooden building. I realized that people were coming into my museum and staying all day. It was so crowded, no one would leave. So I had to come up with a new attraction. So I had it, and we had a door like this, and you would go through the door, and then there was another curtain, and go through yet another door. Well, in it, the attraction was, of course, over the doorway. This way to the egress. So they went to see the exotic animal of an egress going through one door, which locked behind them, went through the curtains and found themselves out in the street. I heard from the newspapers, they said, hurrah for Barnum's humbug again. He did it to us again. That is the art of humbug. And so I wanted to take on that kind of art because I believed I gave my audiences more than double their money's worth. At my circus, 2,000 performers, 600 animals. The show goes for 3 hours long for your quarter. worth double that. Now, if you go to Ringling Brothers, you get what you pay for there. Other questions I wanted to ask. Nothing. We haven't had any so far. We all anxious to get out of here?
No.
Wow. Maybe I take back about all that curiosity I said about Americans anyway. Well, thank you very much. And of course, one last thing I have to say, but I'm going to This is not for sale, but are there questions you guys did ask any questions of T Barnum? I'm always fascinated by that. Sometimes he's so bombastic, people don't ask questions. Hopefully what you got out of this is the truth, this story about sucker born every minute. There is no evidence that he ever said it. And mostly this sentiment I gave at the end, he always believed, and popular spirit was that he gave more than double his money's worth. You went to his circus, his museums, and people were awed by what was there. The scope of it, the amazing amount of it. And remember when Barnum started, the circus was a one-ring show. And he went to 3 rings and stages in between the rings. So sometimes everything's filled. And people, for many years, complained that there was too much going on. They couldn't see it all. But of course, in Barnum's idea, then they'll come back. And what's stunning about it, you would have towns, and I don't know the population of Parachute, and I don't know. But they kept route books for the circuses, and they would play some towns in Nebraska or Oklahoma that would have 500 people in the town, and they would list it. They keep a book, it's called a route book. And it describes each community they're in and any special event, like fire today, or 2 of the people are sick, or a horse died today, or something like that. It's in the book. But they will always show the population and the numbers in the show. And many of these communities say 500 people in the community did 2 shows Straw House. Straw House, circus lingo. Straw House means you have to put straw down on the ground because the seats are all full. In Barnum Circus, that's over 5,000 people in the town. In a little community of 5. People come from hundreds of miles to see this display. It was amazing at its time. In New York City, I do circus history, sorry, I put my glasses on. There are actually people out there. Circuses were so big. In New York City, there's a famous cartoon to announce that Ringling Brothers was coming, Barnum and Bailey was coming to New York City, and it showed a circus tent sat down over New York City. It's in 1915, I think. And just saying the circus is the city, it takes over. There's stories of people in one community, they're doing a murder trial, and the jury finds out that the circus is playing that day, and they ask the judge if they can just find the defendant guilty so they can go to the show. And the judge said, sure, because I want to go too. Crazy back then. Anyway, are there other questions? Well, I try to get it. It's a little warm in here. It's a little warm and stuffy. Not? Well,
By the way, he does 15 different characters.
I do tons.
So,
way too many.
Is the circus still around?
Oh yeah, Barnum and Bailey was purchased by Ringling Brothers in 1904 because Barnum dies in 1891. Bailey dies by a fly bite and gets disease in 1904. Circus doesn't do too well, Barnum and Bailey, and then Ringling has enough money to buy it out, and they operate separately until World War I, when there's such a big need for train cars that the 2 trains are combined. I didn't do it, but Barnum and Bailey was run by 2 trains of 35 cars apiece. That's how much it took to carry this thing from town to town. It is an amazing mess. If you look at the pictures of the 1900 Barnum and Bailey, and Ringling almost got as big, it's enormous, 10 acres. And that's not for parking, that's just to get everything on the lot. It's amazing. The German government came over and then the American government did, the American military and the German military, studied the circus, Barnum and Bailey, spent a year in the circus to learn how to load and unload trains so quickly. Because remember, they would show up in a community like at 6 a.m., take the train apart, parade through town, put up the tent, do a show at 2, do a show at 8, and be gone by around 11:30. An hour after the show was finished, there was nothing there. It was all gone and packed up. It's just staggering how the logistics. And that, people ask us sometimes, that's not Barnum, that's Bailey. Bailey was the genius of making it run. Barnum is he used to do that. He would arrive at circuses and go around in the carriage and go, I'm P.T. Barnum, and people would go crazy. Barnum was just this larger-than-life character, just huge, bombastic, egotistical, and people loved him for it. They really did. Only a couple of people didn't. It was a newspaper man. Most of the negative stories about Barnum come from one newspaper man named Bennett. Bennett tried to buy some land from Barnum. Barnum sold it to him. But Bennett wanted to pay him like $80,000 for this plot of land. Barnum sold it to him for $80,000. It was only worth $40,000. That was its appraisal. Bennett made a mistake. He didn't get it appraised. He thought that was the price, so he paid $80,000 because Barnum had said that was the price. Just in public, because he said, I'm thinking of selling it for $80,000. Well, he was just being bigger than life, because nothing sold for that kind of money. Bennett bought it. Bennett found out it was worth $40,000. Bennett came to Barnum and said, give me my money back. And Barnum went, you signed a contract. We're back to that meritocracy. If you're stupid enough to pay me double the money, I am not stupid enough to turn it down. So Bennett always wrote nasty things about Barnum from then on. He hated him because he felt cheated. Anyway, one more. Or many more, I'll stay. We got food though.
BJ says that you do 15 personalities.
Yeah, I can't remember them all. Don't ask me. It's 15. Is that right? Could be. There's a lot of them.
Can you tell us?
Okay, I'll do some and I'll forget. I don't have any order of them. Theodore Roosevelt and P.T. Barnum are my big two that I do all the time. I do Henry Ford a lot. I do Ernie Pyle, the World War II correspondent, a lot. Very different from Barnum. It's a much more subdued. So is Theodore. Theodore's a bit like Barnum too. He's pretty loud and obnoxious. Let's see. William Clark of Lewis and Clark. Some new ones. I'll think of the new ones. It's almost easier to remember backwards. I now do the movie director D.W. Griffith. I also do Jack Warner of Warner Brothers. I even get a little pencil mustache for that. He's the meanest person. I do George Wallace. Southern Governor George Wallace. I also do Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy. I do Stonewall Jackson. Boy, that's a beard and hair. Oh man, that's a lot of gluing. Andrew Carnegie is one I do quite a bit. Gosh, who else is in there? There's a bunch more. There's about 10. I'll think of them as I drive away. Oh, Billy Sunday, the Right Reverend Billy Sunday. I love doing Billy Sunday, but most people won't have me do him because they're afraid it's a religious program. But it's more about American culture through religion, because he's very much, there are problems in America. And it's because you go to gin joints, sir. And women go dancing with tango lizards in the middle of the day and betray their children. He's very confrontational. And he plays baseball for God on stage. Billy Sunday was famous for running. They estimated, one guy, a journalist said he must run 7 miles during a sermon, a 1-hour sermon, because he's just constantly running, playing baseball, and catching. But most places don't want to touch him because they think it's too religious. And it is religious, but it's really about American culture and why did Billy Sunday exist. Anyway, so I can't think of the other ones. I'll keep thinking and probably pop one up.
You didn't like baseball?
Huh?
Didn't like baseball?
Well, Billy Sunday loved baseball.
No, but
Barnum did not, and we don't know why. That's in his autobiography. that he tried to ban the playing of baseball in Bridgeport because it wasn't amusing or edifying. He doesn't really believe in those kind of physical activities. It's mental. And if you go back, and my only thought is it goes back to like him working on a farm. He respects people who work hard, but that doesn't interest him. It's the mind, coming it over, playing the games with people. He loved practical jokes. He loved laughing and putting people on, you know, from Fiji Mermaid on through. He was just a genius of it. And with Joyce Heth, he was open. He said, I never said she was 152 years old. She said it. She looks really old. But always what he does is the ending of it. And he doesn't care what you think. Come and talk to her. You got to pay your nickel to come in and talk to him. But he's not going to dispute you if you walk out and say the Fiji Mermaid wasn't real. Okay. Did you amuse yourself? Did you engage your mind? Did you get your nickels worth out of it? Most people went, yeah, we did.
Where do we leave our nickels?
I'm sorry?
Where do we leave our nickels?
Yeah, the
Right there, the donation.
right next to the food that's out there.
Anyone seen the nickel in the
Yeah, and to think that he made millions of dollars. He was a millionaire by 1850. Real millions. Back in 1850 when $100 made middle class a year. And he's making millions. He once at one time made, off of the Fiji Mermaid, he made $400 in 1 week. Off just the mermaid for a nickel a shot. He was so good at promoting. He would cause incidents. There was a Congregationalist church with a British minister across the street from the museum. So he went out in the middle of the night and strung, for the 4th of July, strung American flags across on ropes to the church. Didn't ask them, he just did. And so the next day, they of course wanted it down. And he made this big deal in the press about, look at these British people taking down the American flag on the 4th of July. And he got so much press because this huge crowd came down to protest the church trying to get these illegal ropes off their church. And they couldn't take them off. It's just fascinating to watch him operate like this. And he just is so sharp about how far you can push the American people and have them still give you those nickels. Tons of them. And yet he's fairly honest. When they get into circus, like I say, he gets rid of the alcohol in the theater, gets rid of prostitution. In circuses, if you've ever been to a town called Baraboo, Wisconsin, there's a place, there's Circus World Museum is there. And it's a gorgeous museum, and all the old wagons from circuses are there, gold inlay, all restored. They're gorgeous. And it's a beautiful place, but in there they have some of the old ticket wagons for circuses. If you've ever seen one, the ticket window is up this high. And people always ask, why is it so high? Because circuses before Barnum and Bailey, and then, well, Bailey was sort of part of the negative side of it. And the Ringlings came in and made what they called kids' shows, or Bible shows, which is what circus people said, yeah, you're making circuses have a bad name because you're being honest. Circuses would employ pickpockets to work through the crowd, and the pickpocket would split their tape with the circuses. Notorious for this. But the change is up there. When you buy, you put your money up, you get change back in the ticket. You have to grab it off and put it in your hands. Well, circuses are still popular enough that there's a line of people. A, if your hands are up like that, your wallet's exposed. B, they also employ pushers in the line. And while you're getting your coins, these guys are back there going, oh, let's move on! And they sort of push the line up and you get pushed out of the way. And there's such a crowd, probably don't count the change. There's a famous ticket taker named Lightning Tompkins. He paid circuses for the privilege of selling tickets. He paid them because he kept the change, the short change. That was the contract. And he could sell tickets so quickly, he made a fortune. So it was totally designed. Barnum comes in and says, no, we're not going to do that. He hired Pinkerton's guys and circus security to kick out the grifters. No more grifters, no more drinking. It was an honest lot. If he caught somebody pickpocketing, You got circus justice out of that. And circus justice is violent. They take you out back and beat you up really good because they don't want you coming back. They want to send a lesson. You come and do something illegal at the circus because the circus doesn't like. It may be illegal, but you better cut it in the early years. You get hurt really badly. Circuses were rougher. Well, it's a rough life. Rough life. Sorry, we're just going on. Let's go eat food.